I rescind my statement.
That's no fun.
Okay, then I'll leave it.
Well, it's not recorded, so it doesn't really matter. We'll just deny it ever happened.
You're listening to Dots, Lines, and Destinations, a travel podcast with hosts Stephen Seagraves, Fosma Moon, and Seth Miller.
Hey guys, so the Dots, Lines, and Destinations guys sort of let me handle the controls here for a little bit, which may be dangerous, but you are listening to the Miles to Go podcast, and we're doing a little bit of a crossover episode this week. I hope today's show is going to be a fun one. We're absolutely going to go off the rails. This is an idea I've been trying to put together for a while, but schedules and any number of headaches really got in the way. You know, I was writing up a script before we got started, and I put the word inspiration in, which will be a head scratcher for all the other guests of the show today. But let it go their heads. You know, the crew that I have on my show this week, and we're doing this Dots, Lines, and Destinations crossover. These three guys were actually the inspiration for me to start my own podcast. Back then, when I started listening to you guys, it was actually 4 co-hosts. Nowadays it's just 3. Fosma Mood, Seth Miller, and Stephen Seagraves from Dots, Lines, and Destinations are the crew of 3 now. Hey guys, welcome to Miles to Go.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And for my listeners, if you're not familiar with Dots, Lines, and Destinations, it is a travel podcast that frequently goes off the rails, but while at the same time digging deep into the travel industry. I won't even try to summarize how many millions of miles these 3 guys have flown, or how much free booze has been consumed in the process. But
complimentary. It was never free.
Inclusive.
There you go.
So before we get too deep into it, and you know, I understand some of your listeners have probably been here since the beginning, but since I wasn't even here in the beginning of Dots, Lines, do you guys want to just summarize for my listeners sort of like how the show got started, including it wasn't always called Dots, Lines, and Destinations?
Yeah, I can do that. So, I guess we started 9 years ago. Foz was on a previous podcast even before this one called Upgrade. And we had the idea of, when that podcast ended, of doing a show, and we called it Points Order, because we were focusing on points, even though we never really hoarded points, or maybe I'm the only one that hoarded points. I don't know. And so
it was supposed to be ironical.
Yeah, yes. And so we started talking more along the travel lines, and it veers into aviation mostly, though I think there's travel stuff that we're interested in that we talk about.
Yeah, I can tell you that we actually rebranded DLD almost exactly 7 years ago.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about, really.
Yeah, because we did it on our Island Hopper adventure, which was the MH370 day, which was 7 years ago earlier this month.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I remember when it changed. I remember when it changed over. But boy, gosh, I mean, I know I'm old, but 7 years.
Yeah.
I'm just doing the math in my head on how old I was when we started. And I'm like,
that was 7 years ago, but I still remember like it was yesterday.
Well, and in a testimony to how inspirational you guys were, it took me over 4 years of listening to your show to start my own.
It took you 4 years to realize, man, this has gone off the rails.
Maybe someone needs to step in and try something a little better controlled than these guys.
I can do better.
Oh man! All right. So as I said earlier, we're going to follow the Dots, Lines format as opposed to my standard Miles to Go show. So for my listeners, if you enjoy this week's episode, that means you should definitely hit the subscribe button on the Dots, Lines show. And don't worry, I will drop a link into the show notes for that. And with that, I'm officially out of script, so I'm going to turn the steering wheel over to the gang for a bit. And we've got a bunch of geeky stuff to cover.
Can we throw a preemptive apology to those of your listeners that suffer through this and are like, what the hell just happened?
Well, they've suffered through you before, but they've never suffered through a whole Dots, Lines, and Destinations. So
it accumulates with a magnitude, Ed. It gets way worse with all of us.
Yeah. I probably should have had you back on before this, just so there was
to warm it up.
Sort of a build up to it. Yeah.
Just remember, Steven's the adult.
Sometimes
we're grading on a curve, right?
Yes, of course.
So when we're talking about a travel show and we're talking about traveling the world and experiencing everything that the world has to offer, there really is no better place to start than Cancun, right?
Fly me to Cancun. Sorry, there was a whole bit of like Fly Me to the Moon, Fly Me to Cancun bit when Cruz made his trip. Anyway.
Yeah, we're not off the rails at all.
Seth is singing, so that's a good sign.
It's a great sign. Yes, Seth, this was your first contribution to the show, and I hadn't heard about this, but apparently, the state of Quintana Roo, which covers Cancun, Playa del Carmen, Tulum, will now charge you an extra $11 a pop, as a departure tax, huh?
Yeah, because, tourism numbers are up, or strong. And it's hard to say if they're necessarily up, but it's definitely one of the strongest American markets right now for international travel, or really any leisure travel. So why not try to cash in on that $10, $11 a head?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. These sorts of things, I get it. There's so many Americans that are going to Cancun and to Mexico in general right now, but this just seems like a very short-sighted way of thinking, in my opinion. This is not a fee that you see everybody charging in the Mexico and the Caribbean. So, is it small enough that people just won't care?
I would start with it slightly challenging it's not something that we see everybody doing. Premise there. There's a lot of markets that are like, hey, tourists are easy to charge money to. They don't vote here. We may as well take their cash.
Sure, but then why not just increase the hotel tax? You got to create a website and you got to charge people. There's all kinds of stuff that you have to do if you're going to do this, as opposed to just saying, well, sure, let's just charge another, a couple hundred pesos a day on hotel rates. Yeah,
and I probably would have included it in the airport departure tax, although I'm not sure they could do it just for certain airports as easily. That would be another sort of less overhead way to do the charges. But yeah, it's hard.
They're not going to do it based on the ticket. They're not.
It's not a percentage. It's a flat fee.
And they're not doing it. They're not doing it as part of the ticket. Like literally charging it as an add-on to the ticket price.
No, it's a separate transaction you have to do.
Oh, that's a pain.
In other words, you have to present a ticket at the airport. But you have to present a receipt at the airport that you've paid online. And if you don't have that, then you have to buy it at the airport.
So it's like what Panama used to do.
Yeah.
Go down there.
Yeah, lots of places used to do it in person. I think we did that in Palau when we visited 15, 16 years ago for our honeymoon. So, or it was right after they changed it. It was something like that.
Yeah,
but
Ecuador did it for a while too. So.
Yeah, it's on the one hand, the government feels completely in control of the money, and especially if you do it without the, if the government fully controls it and isn't contracting for anyone, then it's much easier to sort of move the money directly into whatever fund that they want to skim from. But no, it's one of many places, especially in the Caribbean, that is riding that tourism cash cow. Right? There's an interesting debate between, as you said, sort of, why don't we just increase the room tax or some other number a little bit more, or just trust that when, if you make it a little cheaper to be here, people will spend more money when they're on the ground. That's a tough one because, maybe a $60 or $70 departure tax, which is not uncommon in some of the Caribbean islands, is too far, but, $10 is okay. I'm not sure what the right number is there. Can you guarantee an extra $10 in, tequila spending from every tourist that visits?
But that wouldn't be money straight into the government coffers, right? That's a drawback to that.
Well, right, because it's got to be $100 per person in spending to get to 10 if it's right, whatever the tax rate is. So there's some interesting challenges there. I don't know. But overall, I tend to think there is probably a sweet spot somewhere in the middle where you're not raising the price so much that people are going to not show up, and also truly by making it a separate transaction, you shield it from. The airlines don't get as pissy with you about making their prices look higher. The hotels don't get as pissy with you about making their prices look higher. You just have that confused passenger at the airport. It's like, what do you mean I have to pay to leave?
Well, and I get that when the fee's like $60 or $70, but you're talking the fee is like $11 when you convert it from pesos. Yeah. So, if the average stay is, call it 4 nights, it's like $2 a night at your hotel, $2.50. This isn't a bottom line mover at those sorts of numbers. So.
No, but they also are charging it per person, so. Not per room.
Yeah, no, all right. Fair point. So
maybe it's $10 a room rate instead.
Yeah, it's still not significant to create all the infrastructure they're creating. There's going to be a cost to all of that. But I don't know, it just seems like an inefficient way.
But someone's cousin gets work by building the infrastructure.
It's true. Many cousins.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to say, there is an airline that flies between Cancun and Cozumel, and you can fly out of Cozumel to most places.
Is Cozumel not also in Quintana Roo?
It is Quintana Roo. Yeah, good call. Dang it. Thought I was
maybe
so close.
Maybe take the domestic flight up to Tijuana, walk across the border, and then fly from San Diego.
Exactly.
To save $10 a person.
You can walk over. Yeah, you can walk over the bridge.
To be fair, that bridge the fee to use the bridge is more than $10.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
But hey.
All right. So speaking of bridges, we almost had a bridge to Europe, but Iceland is open for business for U.S. Residents, but only as far as Iceland. You can't use it as a transit point. Still, I think it's and Stephen, I think you were the one that tagged the story. I think it's interesting, premature, but I mean a little surprising.
Yeah, I think, I was talking with the guys about this, and someone had just said it's already open. Like
It is, yeah. One of the bloggers that we know, Andy from Andy's Travels blog, is already there taking pictures of the volcanic eruption.
Yeah, which I mean, it's fascinating because they've said it wasn't going to happen until the 26th, I believe, of this month. So I guess they're just like, whatever. To me, it raises some interesting questions about, one, what's it take to get in? I think Andy posted, he just used his quarantine card, which doesn't match up with what
vaccine
the
card
website says. Vaccine card. Which doesn't match up with what the government website says. The government website says you basically need the WHO yellow card from a doctor, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. And I wonder how quickly it's going to become inundated. It's really hard to get there right now from the United States because no one's flying nonstop from the U.S. And Iceland Air isn't starting up flights from most of their West Coast or Central U.S. destinations until the summer. So everything's via Europe. So I don't know how Andy got there, but I would be fascinated. I'm going to have to go read his blog now.
Yeah,
I didn't look that up either. Yeah, I wonder how he did get there.
Yeah, I mean, well, don't forget the Wizz Air flight landed as that volcano was erupting, so, there's definitely options.
Well, that's the other thing, too. Now there's a volcano, and it's, causing some headaches for flights departing and arriving.
Yeah, and it looked, I'd heard that there was an eruption, and then I saw some of the pictures, and I wouldn't say it's like massive Mount Etna style just yet, but it seems pretty sizable. I do wonder if we're going to have some of the issues that we had so many years ago with, obviously that's a fairly big chunk of the airspace to get from the U.S. to Europe. I guess, given there's so few flights right now, maybe it's not as big an issue to reroute folks.
Yeah, I was secretly hoping you were going to try to pronounce that old volcano on the show.
No. Remember, this is a scripted show. Oh wait, maybe it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I think for right now, it seems like it's a pretty tame volcano, and so I know there's been some ash cloud kind of reroutes around that southern parts of Iceland because it's really close to Reykjavik is where the volcano is. And so I know there's been some reroutes around that, but I haven't seen anything major stopping traffic going to Europe. So, which is good. But, I don't know. Would you guys go to Iceland during all this? With the pandemic not really being over yet? Would you make the trip?
Well, I mean, part of the compelling, or one of the factors about it that makes it compelling is they are limiting it only to vaccinated, or you spend the time in quarantine, like you always have, and always is relative. But
or proof of previous infection.
Yes, because then you're also considered healthy again.
Yes.
I think we're back to, from my perspective, the same point that I was every time we talk about this travel, which is I don't really like the idea of traveling right now until I know that more people are vaccinated. And being a potential burden on the system, even though I know I am, are all the flight attendants or many of the flight attendants have that option yet? No. Do the hotel workers or whatever? Maybe in Iceland that stuff is better, but it's hard for me to say.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about where flights are going for the moment and schedules, because it was one of the topics I wanted to check in on when we were going to do an episode together, and I don't want to taint the discussion, and I know I won't with you guys because you'll tell me if you think I'm wrong every single time I'm wrong. But I was looking at some.
You're wrong, Ed.
Thank you. Couldn't have seen that one coming. I can't remember not to pitch softball.
Kind of walked right into it.
Yeah. You pitch softball, somebody's going to hit it out of the park on this show. So Cranky Flyer has been doing these updates on a weekly basis of all the various airlines and how they're cutting up frequencies and dumping capacity. And, the last couple updates for April, May, June, were surprising to me because, largely we believe that business travel hasn't really returned in any meaningful way, but it seems like the airlines are anywhere in the 20 to 30% capacity cuts from their 2019 numbers. And I don't know, it doesn't feel like we're at 70% of the 2019 numbers yet. Am I off base here?
Doesn't feel that way in terms of the number of seats flying or where the planes
demand
are going, or
I know there's leisure demand, but essentially if the airlines can fly 70% of their capacity reasonably full, that means that only 30% of the people that traveled in April of 19 were business travelers, or there's that much more leisure travel today.
I think there's some qualifications we need to make, right? So jets are flying, so capacity is there. doesn't mean demand's there. I think, if you look tonight, right, like KLM's flying a bunch of destinations out of the United States to Amsterdam. Guaranteed those flights aren't full or half full.
That's fair, but at the same time, I mean, the TSA screening numbers are running around 60% right now.
True.
Spring break is huge. Right? Spring break. It's all. Yep. There's been some interesting patterns around holidays, and I'll count spring break as a holiday, even though that's stupid. And we're going into Easter, right? Easter is this coming weekend.
The following weekend, yeah, April 2nd-ish.
It's always one of the weekends of Passover, and I never know which. Sorry.
Fourth.
Okay, so it's the second weekend of Passover this year. But yeah, like, you're getting close to Easter, and you've got spring break travel, and there are some number of people now who are vaccinated, and there's plenty of people that are like, I stayed home all winter, F this, I'm going out there. Or I didn't stay home all winter, and I still like traveling, and so I'm going to keep doing me. Like, there's all those things, but yeah, you're looking at 60-70% demand, or seats, 60-70% of 2 years ago now numbers of March 2019 is what I've been comparing. And thanks to the TSA, you can't do it correctly, but whatever.
Well, in March I kind of get, but like when you get like April and May to me was always one of those periods of the year. I mean, certainly not the first week of April because you still have some spring break hangover, but before you get to Memorial Day, that always struck me as that's really a business travel sort of season. That's not really like people aren't targeting the first week of May. Well, all right, maybe Cinco de Mayo, but they're not. That's not typically like, hey, this is where all the leisure travel goes. Like that strikes me as one of those times where it's going to have a higher slant of business travelers.
Yeah,
and then you got airlines like Alaska saying, hey, we're going to be at 80% of our May 2019 numbers. And it's, wow, that seems like a lot. And maybe some airlines have downgauged, but I think Alaska is a good example of they don't have a lot of gap in seats per plane, if you will.
And the numbers usually when they're talking about that is available seats or available seat miles, right? So it's not really... It's not, you can say they're downgauging or whatever, but if they say they're running at 80% capacity, it's not that they took 20% of the planes out, it's they took 20% of the seat miles out. So it really is very close to full. I think what it really tells you is what the spread for the different airlines was on their typical amount of business travel. Alaska Airlines was much more leisure.
Yeah, well, and I kind of expected that with Alaska, but I mean, so American, and maybe they'll adjust these numbers, but they posted a 23% drop from their May 2019 numbers. Do I really think American's going to be at 78, 77% of their capacity in May? Man, I don't think so.
How else are they going to pay off that $10 billion loan against the loyalty program?
Well, the market's good. You just refinance.
I mean, that basically is the American approach, so.
Right. Yeah, just refinance. Somebody else will give you a better rate. I mean, not that it was a great rate. It was like 6% or something like that. I wouldn't call that great corporate debt rate, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have a hard time wrapping my arms around, that they're going to fly 80% of their schedule, and it's like setting aside pricing and all that, but that they're going to fill that many seats in May.
And, well, one thing I'll say is May schedules definitely aren't final yet.
Sure.
But there is a big push right now towards sort of riding the vaccine wave and saying, if everybody's, didn't Biden say that every state should be able to open vaccines to everyone by May 1st or something like that?
Yeah, and some states have gotten in there early. I do a bunch of travel to Vegas for work, and they've said they're going to open vaccines up to every Nevadan by April 15th. And maybe that will change things.
Arizona opened it up today. I mean,
oh, did they really?
Yeah, I think as sometime this week it's going to officially be open, but it's happening. So it's hard to believe in some ways. I think part of that is just the sort of hangover of how long have we been going through this.
Yeah.
But, what I'll add is part of it is also very dependent on market basis, right? I've traveled a bit over the last 6 months, but I can tell you, while flights in and out of Newark aren't that full, when I've flown through Texas, flights going to Texas are packed.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, depending on how, locked down the states were, there's still rollover fallout from that's still going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was unpleasantly surprised how full Philadelphia was in the express terminal, F or whatever, flying through on American the other day on a work trip. So
I am genuinely surprised at how hard it is to get to the East Coast from here, from Portland. There's nothing nonstop right now, really. I think the DCA flight is running like every other day. But other than that, it's pretty difficult.
Well, this is actually one of the topics I had listed, and I didn't have an article attached to it, so I forgot to include it in the list that I sent you guys. But, I do wonder, it's very clear to me when I look at the schedules that they're geared towards what works for leisure folks. And some of the routes that I fly frequently, they've started operating again. So, like, for example, nonstop Vegas flights were off the books for a bit and they're back on, but they're back on for a schedule that really doesn't work for a business traveler. Like the first departure there's only 2 a day, and I think the first departure is like 10:45 in the morning, which essentially just blows the whole day in Vegas. So, like, as you said, Stephen, like, hard to get from the West Coast to the East Coast. I mean, it's going to be pretty hard for me to fly efficiently with the schedules that are out there. And my gut tells me it's going to be a while before business travelers are going to have efficient schedules for them to get places for meetings.
We talked about this. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on an episode. I drove to New Jersey because I couldn't get a decent time flight.
Right.
I mean, I absolutely agree that the business travel schedule in many markets sucks right now. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a challenge, right, for companies that are eventually going to go back. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, maybe by the summer. Some companies are going to have their traveling schedules back or asking people to travel again. And I think it's going to be a challenge if the airline schedules are the same as they are right now.
Do we really think we're going to go back in mass, given how efficiently people have been able to work remotely over the last year?
In my industry, people are going to be back in the office. No question.
Me too. Like, there's certainly going to be industries where it's not, but I mean, yeah, I think there are a lot of industries that are going to go back to the old path. Maybe there'll be a few less trips, but I think you're going to see some industries come back almost as normal.
I believe that we'll go back, but I think we'll see a 20-30% reduction. And that's a huge gap from where we were.
I'm totally fine if the Apple employees and the IBM employees and the Intel employees and the Nike employees aren't on my flights anymore. I'm fine.
You just want more upgrades.
That's exactly it.
Well, heck, I mean...
That was subtle, Stephen. Well played.
We all come from a time period where I can remember having discussions back on Flyer Talk in the days where there were years as an executive platinum where I would miss one upgrade out of 80, 90, 100 flights. But, and those days obviously have disappeared. So, like Stephen, I wouldn't mind if we went back to that time period. I sometimes went 6, 7, 8 months without missing an upgrade.
Don't let him fool you. Neither would Foz. Foz wouldn't mind it at all.
I'm not saying otherwise.
But I do wonder, so Foz, to your point, so let's say there's 20 or 30% trimmed out of the schedule for business travelers or folks who aren't traveling for business any longer, or they're taking less frequent trips. At some point you have this like chicken and egg thing of, I will, if they don't optimize the schedules for business, I will fly less because it'll take me longer to get places. So just by virtue of I want a certain number of days at home in between trips, if it takes me if I lose a day traveling because of crappy flight times, I'm not going to all of a sudden decide I want to be away from home an extra 22 days a year because their schedules aren't efficient.
Right. And I mean, the bigger, the thing that I ponder, and, we're completely going off the rails now.
Ooh, ponder. Ooh.
Is, what does this mean for the loyalty programs? Right? The loyalty programs over the last 5 years have really pivoted to high revenue and getting the people who are spending. But if you're seeing a drop in your high-end packs, do you have to retool the programs?
Well, I mean, especially until fares go up again, obviously. I mean, I think it's sort of laughable that the airlines have elite qualifying dollar thresholds right now because I couldn't buy tickets expensive enough to hit them.
Oh, look at Newark, San Francisco.
No thanks. That's all you. All you.
But there's days when those seats are $2,000 a piece.
Wow.
And I was actually surprised to see that Boston, San Francisco on a 738 or 9 is, completely packed pretty much every day. Full.
But there's not a lot of, there's not a lot of flights on that route. I looked at, I won't say that route specifically, but I'll use a route that I used to fly regularly, Dulles, Denver. And when I first started flying that route, and my math might not be correct, but it'll be close. There were 11 flights a day between the two. There were multiple frequencies with 767s and 777s. I think there were 2 767s and a 777. There were 75s. Like, there were a lot of seats on that route. And now, like, an average day is like 4 or 5 frequencies, and they're all narrow bodies. And so, I mean, like, the number of seats in between Dulles and Denver has dropped by, 60, 70%.
Yeah.
But I mean, part of that is just a function of where they're trying to, route people through. The connecting flows have changed significantly.
Well, that and pre-merger United used to do a lot of consolidator fares. Right, and they don't do as nearly as many as they used to, so that's why they were flying so many wide bodies between hubs.
Right, and that was before pre-pandemic. All of the wide bodies were gone from Dulles, Denver, so it was down to all narrow bodies. There weren't even any more 757s on the route, so the capacity had already been trimmed significantly. And so now you took planes that had half the number of seats, and then you cut half of those routes. And there's still some, obviously reasonable level of travel that has to happen between those two hubs, and so it just fills up.
Yeah, and back to Foz's question though, what are programs going to do, right? I mean, Ed, you primarily fly United and American, right?
Well, and here's the bomb dropper. I applied for the Delta Reserve Amex. I was approved just a couple days ago. I haven't written about it for the blog yet. But, I mean, until they stop blocking middle seats, if I started flying now, nobody can get me to Vegas in a timely manner, period. So I'm going to either have to connect on someone or lose most of the day. And if I can have a seat empty beside me, I may be a Delta guy because, the value of the elite programs holds a lot less sway for me right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if like Alaska's the one that's doing it right. Like no qualifying dollars, right? There's no spend requirement really. Hopefully that stays. It's still mileage based. And their fares right now are dirt cheap. I mean, they're like advertising, $31 fares or $75 fares up and down the West Coast.
And so if you're wondering why they were able to fill 80% of the seats that they did 2 years ago.
Exactly. And everybody's going to Phoenix, right? They're trying to get out of the rain. So everybody's going to Phoenix, Tucson.
One of the interesting things is, we talk a lot about the recovery and what it means and, passenger numbers, but a huge part of what it means to have a recovered industry is also the dollars. And those are definitely not tracking as close as the passenger numbers are. The passengers will come first and then the dollars. That's how it always happens. And if the passengers come back quickly enough and more quickly than the airlines can get planes out of the desert and pilots and flight attendants off of furlough and recertified and all those things, there will potentially be some spikes in fares. But I think there's potential for a sort of a super spike in fares coming into this summer as the pent-up demand releases, and then things settling down a little bit again.
Yeah, I think there's definitely the potential for a spike. A lot of that's going to come down to what they decide to do with the planes they have parked. I mean, they can certainly drive fares a bit if they keep planes on the ground and don't ramp back up. I would argue that I think if you put all the planes back on the runways, I don't think they can fill that many at a premium anytime soon.
Definitely not.
I mean, domestically, that's all great. I'm curious to see what happens internationally. Because at the end of the day, that's the high register for the airlines.
Yeah.
And that's where the big 3 U.S. carriers and many of the international carriers are way more exposed. Yeah. Right? That's why you see Alaska is able to say it can get its capacity back up. Spirit and Frontier, and those guys are actually going to be above 2019 numbers later this year in terms of capacity. But they don't fly long haul. They don't fly intercontinental, really. Yeah,
and this was actually one of the topics I want to cover tonight. And selfishly, I'm going to focus on Dulles, my home airport, for a second. I think, when we looked at United's network, my personal opinion was that a lot of the flights that were out of Dulles were things that serve connecting flow. I don't think there was enough O&D originating departing traffic to cover all of these routes. And so some of the routes, there was a huge cut of international flights out of Dulles on United. And so just a quick list of destinations: Amsterdam, Dublin, Edinburgh, Geneva, Lisbon, Beijing, Tokyo. Those are all places that I know people want to go to, but what are the chances that some of these flights, Geneva,
can't go to half of them, so there's that.
You're right, but even when you can, I think those flights were probably not super performers for United before. They probably did okay on them, but they need some sort of flow to those cities, but they certainly aren't. They probably aren't going to need wide body flow to a lot of these places from Dulles specifically anytime soon. So I just don't know what my airport looks like in 2 years.
Well, Geneva was always driven by UN.
Fair, good point. What about something like, Edinburgh or Amsterdam?
Edinburgh? You mean?
How many different ways are you going to say the name of the lovely town in Scotland? This is fun.
Well, Edinburgh was a 7.5, right? Is it really that much of a loss?
No, it's not that. It's more do they operate that flight anytime again in the near future?
No.
Right, that's what I think.
Maybe summer 2022 if you're lucky, probably 2023. And it'll be seasonal.
Yeah, it was summer. It was always summer only. And it was always just for vacationers.
Sure, but I don't think that route comes back even summer only for a while.
It all comes back down to demand and how things play out, right? There's so many unknowns. Mm-hmm. If the UK opens up, right, truly opens up, and things are moving forward, then the demand could be there.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, we talked about pent-up demand and we talked about Cancun at the beginning of the show. People want to get out and go somewhere, and I think people, in a lot of ways, don't care where it is as long as it's somewhere. So, it may be, I think the UK is a good example. If their vaccine rollout program continues to progress the way it is and they start getting the second shots into people, I could see that being one of the first countries that is willing to allow Americans in, and that we're willing to allow that level of reciprocity to.
But there's a bigger thing to think about, right? It's fine, great the country opens, but you also have to assume that all the things people want to go do are also open. The festivals and stuff. that normally happen. Like, there's a lot of things that need to play out for things to go back to normal.
Well, sure. And if you think about, and I don't disagree with what you said about, say, the UK specifically and maybe a seasonal route, but considering that they still have, call it probably half a dozen European flights out of Dulles. So you've got London, Paris, Frankfurt, Munich, Brussels is still operating, Zurich. So we've got half a dozen places. When do the other 4 or 5 really, like, when's the need as opposed to, again, as you say, people want to go somewhere, but are there enough people willing to pay enough of a price to go enough somewheres to bring a lot of these flights back? I mean, they've already got a decent amount of flights for what today's levels are.
You basically have the pre-merger European network at this point.
Yeah.
With the exception of Geneva.
I don't see, I mean, maybe United makes a move, or some of the other airlines make a move and they say, look, we're not going to, Houston's not going to be our nonstop market to Europe. Or maybe they're going to say the same thing about Dulles and they're going to push everything through Newark. Unlikely, because I think there's enough O&D out of it for United to be happy. But I'm just wondering, like, maybe Houston, they say, okay, well, we're going to fly Frankfurt and maybe Amsterdam if we can get the corporate contracts, but nothing else. And they push all that traffic through Dulles. Maybe.
But, I mean, aside from, other than London, what other European...
Well, that's really it.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to drop London from Houston.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't think so. And Frankfurt and Munich, if Lufthansa is still a strong partner, I mean, those make sense.
And Dulles is a pre-merger, right? Most of the routes you're talking about were all seasonal.
And you still have to connect, the entire southeast to Europe somewhere.
You do. I felt like, and look, I benefited from it. I felt like pre-COVID, United was over-indexed on total destinations. I mean, I could always find 4 premium award seats somewhere in Europe from Dulles, pretty much 12 months a year, between all the different destinations they had. So it always felt like there was more capacity chasing not enough passengers.
I mean, not to poop on your airport is a reason.
Wow.
And there we have it. 37 minutes into the show, and Steven's the first one to trash my home airport.
I mean, I've flown through Dulles plenty. It was a great connection out of Montreal. But I mean, if it's my first choice of where I'm going to fly through to get to Europe, I'll pick somewhere else. I would, because I never know if Annie Ann's is going to be open for dinner.
Hey, there's a Five Guys
in the other terminal.
Yeah, look, I mean, I understand it's not as pretty as, say, the new Newark is, and we don't have, all of those wonderful dining options that Foz loves so much at the
OTG.
But I mean, again, I don't think the majority of people are choosing their connection point because of the quality of the connecting airport. I understand that we do things like that, but I think, I think a lot of folks are either going to choose it based on pricing, or overall schedule.
Well, I think the overall schedule is the piece, Ed. Like, looking at schedules from me, right, coming from the West Coast, they were never great, right? It was always better for me, or easier for me to go through Chicago.
Yeah.
Or maybe Newark, depending on how I wanted to connect.
That's by design, right? Like, Dulles is really for South Central U.S. and the Southeast U.S.
Yeah.
And really, they wanted to, at least for United, they want to minimize people connecting in Newark because they have a fair bit of O&D traffic that can fill the seats, so they were trying to push a lot of that to Dulles.
And honestly, in some ways, South Central and Southeast are where the demand is strongest right now. I mean, you said it, you passed through Texas and it was insane, right? Like, those are the markets that are going to want to connect to Europe, potentially. So, I don't know, maybe you see Dulles come back faster than you were expecting just because that's where the connections are. Now, United may siphon off some of that connecting flow via Newark a little longer than not because it needs to still support the broader local traffic market, and there's not quite as big a rebound in New York yet. But it's, I could see if you really are just looking at how the market recovers and where those connections were, you could see a stronger rebound at Dulles to start.
Yeah, I guess it depends on where they pick, because again, I think it goes back to that belief that United's always been a connecting hub, that it's not really about O&D for that travel. As you guys said, it's a way to relocate demand from Newark somewhere on the East Coast to allow people to connect. It's United's version of American's Charlotte hub, if you will.
Philly.
Choose Dulles over Charlotte.
I mean, there is O&D. There is O&D, definitely, but I think it's not nearly as much as some of the other airports.
Correct. Yeah, I would say absolutely. Like, there's certainly government contract O&D. I get it. There's the contractors, there's the lobbyists, but the Newark market should be much more underpinned by corporate contracts than Dulles.
Yeah.
I don't know that for certain, but I mean, the notional things I've heard about, like what it takes to qualify for global services at Newark versus Dulles, those sorts of things, and some of the corporate contracts I have heard about, it seems like there's a lot more supporting the Newark market than the Dulles market.
I would agree with that.
So before we leave my home airport, which Stephen was so nice enough to poop on, I want to pick one more thing. I just think it's interesting that American, in spinning up new service, has finally decided to start serving Dulles again in some way, shape, or form, but they're somehow choosing not to do it from a hub. And this is the reason why I went away. Steven, you said I was an American flyer. I was an executive platinum flyer for 10 years, and I gave it up because American slowly stopped flying from most of their hubs to Dulles. They used to fly from Chicago, Dallas, LA, Miami, and back when they had a mini hub in San Juan, they flew San Juan Dulles. And obviously don't fly San Juan anymore. They don't fly Miami. They don't fly Chicago. They've got a daily LA, which I don't even know if it's running right now. And they've got Dallas Fort Worth, but they're spinning up Austin to Dulles.
When does that start?
Summertime?
Do they fly?
That's the Austin, my focus city.
Mm-hmm.
But do they fly national to Austin?
No.
They don't?
Do they? Maybe they do.
They would have to.
Capital Connector?
Well, not just that, but Austin's a good market for them generally. I'd be surprised if they didn't fly it. As we all hammer away on our browsers to look up TCA Austin. But I've had this conversation with folks at American before, and their comment to me has always been, "Look, when we finish filling out, paraphrasing, when we finish filling out national, we'll absolutely go overflow at Dulles." But they have they have no designs to really spin the airport up. So I guess okay, so you're focusing on Austin, and you don't pick to fly to your hub, and I don't see nonstops. I see one stop. So they're choosing not to fly a nonstop Austin national, and they're going to fly Austin Dulles. That's just weird to me.
Southwest does fly DC to national to Austin, so they hold that market, as it were. I would bet it's tied entirely to corporate contracts and people that are going out to the defense contractors or whoever, for the tech corridor. I don't know what the hell you guys call it in DC area, but
Dulles Tollway.
Yeah, the Dulles Tollway. The Silver Line.
Soon. When
we're building it.
We're building it.
Right. It's actually I think they started building it after O'Hare started constructing or fixing the rental car shuttle train, and they're going to open it before. So,
did they? Well, the real question is, did they start building the Silver Line to Dulles before or after this podcast started?
So you're mad that we're talking too long.
No, I don't mean the episode. I mean the 7 years
in general.
I think I'd go with the podcast, but I'm not sure.
I think the podcast is older, but I'm not sure.
I think, yeah. I'm going to have to go back and look that up later.
Are we talking about actual construction start or when the project was approved?
Oh, the project was approved when I moved down here. That was 25 years ago. No, we're talking about actual construction. Yeah, no. When I moved down here, I remember them telling me, "Oh, it's going to be great. There's going to be a train to the airport."
We'll live out by a train station.
that was 97, by the way. And I remember looking at a condo back then that they said was going to be right by the metro stop that was going to be put there, and that metro stop is scheduled to open this year. And that was 97, so that's only 24 years.
Well, the original 1968 Metro Rail plan included an eventual extension to Dulles Airport.
And they have delivered.
Yes, ish. Formal approval in 2004, construction in 2005-ish, maybe.
All right, so the extension is older than the show.
No, I'm sorry. Phase 2 contract was awarded in 2013. Sorry.
That makes more sense. So it's right around the same time as when the show started.
So I can give you 3 companies just looking at Google Maps. Cisco, Lockheed Martin, and Amazon Web Services are all right by Dulles. And
there are a lot of companies right by Dulles. Do you think those companies have big presence in Austin as well?
They do. Yeah, I know for a fact Cisco does.
Okay.
And Amazon does. So, could be it. I don't know. I mean, it's weird to me still, even with the maybe unless there's a corporate contract. It'd be surprising to me if those companies said fly American.
Because United was already flying that route.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and also remember that DC slots are way more limited.
True.
Yeah, they sure are. It's just weird. And again, I'll get off the soapbox after this, but it's been one of those things where, since they got rid of Dulles Chicago, you can't really live out my way and fly to the Midwest on American, because the way the schedules all go, you got to go down to Charlotte, and the connecting times make it. So if I have to go to Fort Wayne or Peoria or any of those places, I just can't do it on American because I lose the whole day. I've got to backtrack down to Charlotte, connect, and make my way somewhere in the Midwest, which is, the schedules just aren't timed for it. So it's just weird.
Delta, for going to Peoria?
Look, some of us go to Peoria.
Delta, here you come, right? I mean,
right. Delta's got Detroit and Minneapolis for me, so that'll be starting as soon as somebody shoves a vaccine in my arm.
You'll get a good walk in at Detroit too. Like a nice 5-mile hike down that terminal.
That's okay. I'm a lifelong Pistons fan, so I'll enjoy seeing the Pistons gear hanging from the rafters. I'll be the only one enjoying the Pistons gear hanging from the rafters. So I think the last thing on my list, and I know Foz has what he calls commentary, but I'll call a rant. So I guess I really feel like I should have known this, but so we'll include this link in the show notes. But there was a story a couple weeks ago about a Frontier flight where the de-icing didn't really happen, and there was a significant buildup on the wings of a Frontier plane, as described by some as a foot of ice and snow, which seems like a bit of an exaggeration to me. Though I guess it's
if you look at the picture, it's hard to tell, but it's pretty thick.
Yeah. I guess I just look. Don't get me wrong. I'm waiting for somebody to hit this softball over the fence. Like, I understand that the plane doesn't have rearview mirrors. I get it, but it didn't really sink into me that there's really nobody sort of auditing the edge of the wing, if you will, after de-icing to make sure it's actually clear.
This is the same reason that the ground crew shows the pin when they pull it from the bottom of the plane. So
that's that guy under the nose gear holding the big thing with the flappy.
Yeah, explain that in more detail for people who aren't nerds like you.
So, I mean, there's some safety security equipment, right? And that pin is basically, he's showing, hey, I've verified that this is out, and you can retract the gear.
It prevents the nose gear from retracting, so when you're on the ground, you don't want it to accidentally collapse.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. That would be bad, right?
Yeah. So he's showing that to the pilot to say, you're not going to get up in the air and have to turn right back around.
Right.
To come do an emergency landing. So it's a safety thing, right? It's accountability. And I think the de-icing crew failed
badly.
Yeah, and so you take that thing with the pin as an example, and for like the 7 of my listeners that are still listening, that now understand what the pin is for. I guess I wonder, does an episode like this lead towards discussion about, hey, there needs to be some sort of a clean view of the wing before you're released from de-icing?
It's a good question.
It's certainly achievable by a flight attendant. It's just, I'm not saying it's a necessary step, but it's certainly not a hard step to accomplish.
Yes and no. I mean, there is the challenge of like getting a pilot in the midst of everything else on the checklist to get up and walk out of the flight deck to go check that.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. What if you had a flight attendant? What if a flight attendant's responsibility is part of the, you're briefing the emergency exit rows, which is generally where the wings are anyway. It's like, all right, well, part of being at the exit rows. I mean, obviously that's not the right timing for every airport because they de-ice in different places. But would it be a reasonable use of the flight attendant's time to lean over and look out the window and see if they see ice on the wings? I mean, that was the Colgan Air crash in Buffalo a number of years ago was because of ice in the wings.
But, I mean, the one wild card I would say is, right, will every flight attendant be able to do that effectively? Because the pilots will understand how much will impact the operation.
Yeah. Does it look like you could go make angels on the wing or not? Might not be a sufficient metric. I think that's what Foz is getting at.
Basically.
And I guess for folks who are listening who aren't aware, like what's a good idea of a clean wing? Like how much debris can be on that leading edge before?
Pretty much none.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Like when they said there was a foot, I'm like, come on. Like I've never seen. I don't know that I've ever backed away from a gate without much snow on the wings.
Yeah. Stephen, who are you thinking about your departure in Vilnius?
Yes.
Is it bad that I can pick which ridiculous story Stephen wants to tell? That's how you know we've been doing this almost 10 years.
I mean, it was to the point that my friend and I that was sitting next to me, we both kind of looked at each other like, they didn't de-ice us, and there's ice on the wing. That was fun.
Ed, I got some vaguely good news for you on your Peoria trips. If things go to plan and the DOT issues the small city grant that the University of Illinois Champaign Airport is requesting, I think it's $800,000, then $850. That'll go into part of a like $1.2 million grant program that they're trying to use to bribe American Airlines to fly nonstop to DCA. And from there, it's a quick drive over to Peoria. So that might save you.
But then
it's possible.
To DCA.
That's true.
But it's a nonstop flight.
Check, please. I will say, the reason why I don't necessarily, I mean, that flight might happen with that subsidy, but the reason why I didn't figure a Peoria flight would ever happen is, as far as I know, Caterpillar, which is the major business down there, they're moving their headquarters to Chicago. So, most of what was going to Peoria probably isn't going to be going to and from Peoria anymore.
Oops. If it makes you, the other one that's trying to do it is Springfield, Missouri. One is similarly trying to bribe American to use one of its DC slots for service with a similar dollar figure.
Yeah.
Also seems very unlikely to me.
A lot of things seem unlikely now, but gosh, I mean, I can't wait to see what the next 6 months bring. I'm insanely interested to see what routes come back, and quite frankly, again, because I'm a business traveler by nature, what these business travel schedules and prices are going to look like. I'm still not convinced I have any real clue what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
Not that it's a surprise to anyone on the show with me that I have no clue.
I don't know if you want to talk more about de-icing, but I was just going to say I really think it's a supervisor for these de-icing crews. Depending on where you're at, which city you're in, a lot of these de-icing operations take place at a pad that's
right,
just for de-icing, and typically there are supervisors out there. And to me, it seems like it would make sense that the supervisor comes by to each plane and says, yeah, you're good to go, checks off on it. And there's an accountability there for that.
Well, and you would think in a place, because that incident happened in Nashville, if I recall correctly. And someone in a place like Nashville, you would have even more supervision because they don't do it that often.
Yeah.
Right.
Except they don't do it that often, so they don't staff enough for it.
And I realize that, but that's where you need more scrutiny, whereas something like Minneapolis, right? Those guys know how to do it on a regular basis.
Yeah, Denver has snow boilers out on the runway. They've got the whole de-icing and snow removal thing down pretty well.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, it's to me, it's just like it's a question of making sure people are trained and checked up on and made accountable for what they're doing.
I just would have thought that those procedures would have already been in place. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing. Is like, okay, they're held accountable, but what does that mean when the plane crashes?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Right? These guys, I believe the two people involved in this incident were quote unquote held accountable, but had there been an incident, what does that really?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, at the risk of saying it prematurely, I'm going to do my quick Stephen Seagraves imitation and say, well, I think that's a show, guys.
Well, wait, we got to get Foz's rant.
Oh, darn it. I forgot. Oh, Foz, we're out of time. Gosh. No, we've got some bonus content for folks as well. So the Dots Lines Patreon folks, which apparently I am one of, will want to stick around, for that. But first, and by the way, Stephen, it's commentary, not rant.
It actually is commentary. I don't have a rant. But
he's getting awfully worked up for a guy that's not ranting.
But
nobody is hitting the subscribe button. Just want you to know that.
That people are hitting unsubscribe, if anything. Over the last few months, as renting cars, I've noticed something very peculiar. Previous renters are personalizing these cars. Like I had one a few weeks ago where someone just put bumper etchings on the car, and Hertz didn't do anything about it. Like when I got to it, it had bumper etchings out in the presence aisle. I had another one which had custom tint in it.
Custom tint?
Custom tint. I'm like, literally, I get into this car. I'm like, is this someone's car?
Like a little air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror.
There could have been.
Was this a warm weather city? Obviously cars can move around.
It did have Florida plates. There was another car with someone's apartment complex sticker in it.
What?
Seriously?
These just and these were from real companies, right?
Yes.
Not like
fly by night, shady.
Nope, one of the big three. One of the big three.
Yeah.
And in some of the cities, they just don't have cars.
Yes, I've seen and heard that from a number. I've had this question come up a number of times in recent podcast episodes of folks who can't find rental cars.
Like I've had a couple times, I'll go out there. There's not a single car out there.
Where are the cars?
In people's apartment parking lots. Did you hear?
Well, and are they doing long-term rentals? Is that one of the ways that they're subsidizing the fleet right now? Like renting a car out to someone for a month or two?
That's possible. I partially believe that with all the people buying cars over the last year, they've probably sold a number of cars to liquidate some of their assets because they don't.
And then bought them back?
Wow.
Hey, can we get that Ford Focus back this week? We're going to need it.
Well, why wouldn't you at least go through the effort of taking the stuff off? That's the thing that surprises me.
Well, maybe they're just borrowing it for the week.
They're wet leasing the rental car?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's like a lease. They're leasing the cars out. They got a whole new program. You haven't even heard about it. It's so hip.
They're doing insurance replacement vehicles and letting people hold on to the cars, and then they just call them when they need it back for a weekend.
Yeah, maybe.
They're helping out the environment.
Absolutely. It was just a very interesting observation. And I just don't know if anyone else had heard or experienced that, but I'm like, at least 3 cars I could think of where it was clearly personally marked.
That's bizarre. I don't think I've ever seen an apartment sticker in a rental car.
That and the bumper sticker were really the two. But the custom tinting was really confusing as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you told me it had like Arizona or Vegas plates, I mean, like window tint is sort of like, bottled water and sunscreen in Arizona and Las Vegas, but Florida, I don't know.
But this was beyond the normal tint. Like, in this
Did
case,
they have like someone like their boyfriend or girlfriend's name above the windshield, at the top of the windshield too?
Might have. No.
Mud flaps with like the silver woman with the legs crossed.
No, I'll get 2 Florida cars right next to each other. Both Infiniti QX50s, very different tinting. One was the standard, one was clearly like, had this super dark and at the top of the windshield, and the back windows were really, you could barely see through them. Like, literally, because every once in a while I've gotten into a car, which is clearly someone's personal car parked in the aisle where it shouldn't be. And I'm like, I got in, I'm like, is this someone's car? And I'm like, there's a key here.
No, wait, stop. I want to go
you get
back.
a keychain too?
I want to go back to every now and then you just accidentally get into someone's personal car in the rental car aisle.
Are the keys in it? Like, what's going on?
No, because that's the thing that tells me that it's not really a rental car because there's no key in it.
Oh, yeah. I can't imagine just like getting in, man. This guy needs to lay off the patchouli.
It generally is the scent that gives it away first, that it is not a rental.
Oh, check please. Do you guys want to tease the bonus content before we close stuff out?
Sure, we're gonna talk about meth being a hell of a drug, and
why don't we just stop there?
Wow, look at all the people clamoring for the Patreon.
And some Hong Kong cargo limits Seth wrote about.
Yeah, and I don't think I can do it justice to do it a second time. So, Stephen, I think you got to close the show.
Oh, well, yeah. Thanks for listening. You can follow us on Twitter @DotsLines, moredotmorelines.com. Thanks for listening. Happy travels.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. I think.
Thanks guys for being on.